Radio Angelus, 24-hour online radio.
Good afternoon and welcome to Lunchtime Catechesis, a series of talks to help us remind ourselves of the church's teaching. Last week we looked at the sacrament of marriage, which is under the sacrament of vocation. Vocation by which God calls us to love. The love that must exist both universally and particularly. In a very unique way, God loves us particularly, and that is seen in the sacrament of marriage. But also in the sacrament of holy orders, we see the universal love of God. Now, this sacrament of holy orders is the sacrament by which God calls a person, specifically a male, ordains him into his own image, and calls him to service. Now, the sacrament is called the sacrament of holy orders because there are three orders in this sacrament. We have the order of the episcopacy, which is the bishops, the order of the presbyterate, which is the priests, and the order of the diaconate, which is the deacons. Now, the order of priests and episcopacy, bishops and priests, are called and share in the ministry of Jesus, in the priesthood of Jesus. What that means is that they have been called into a divine service. These two orders are ordained and they act in the person of Christ. They act in persona Christi. What that means is that when a priest or a bishop is acting or is celebrating Mass, he acts on behalf of Christ. His actions are the very actions of Christ himself. And so when a priest baptizes, it's Christ who baptizes. When we go to the deacons, they act in the name of Christ. It is different. Why? Because the institution of the diaconate order was instituted by the church. It is not a divine institution. We know this from the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 6, when there were differences and miscommunication among the early church believers, and yet the apostles thought it wise to try and institute this ministry in order to help build the church. So deacons are called to the service of the word and the service of the table. Now, I want to address another issue about the sacrament of holy orders. Why is it that only males are ordained into this sacrament? There are two reasons. First, a male is called into this ministry because of the incarnation. Now, Jesus Christ, who is God, became man, and in becoming man, he chose the male species. Now, this is not an arbitrary choice. This is a choice engraved in the very calling and in the very mystery of God. Why? Because Jesus is the bridegroom who has come to marry the spouse, which is the church. When we read Ephesians chapter 5, we get to understand this theology by which Jesus, who is the bridegroom, marries the church. It is this symbolism that makes the church choose the male so that he can be at the service of the church, which is a spouse. It's also related to why priests do not marry. But most importantly, we must understand that to each sacrament, there is a matter and a form. And the matter of every sacrament is the physical things that we use. So the matter, for example, of baptism is water, which cannot be changed. In the same way, the matter of the priesthood is the male species, which cannot be changed because it is engraved in the person of Christ, who was a male. The second reason is because Jesus Christ chose all his apostles as male. This is not a cultural issue. Jesus did not skip females because he was afraid of the cultural shock it may have had at the time, because we understand that Jesus really did not care about breaking cultural rules. He did it on many occasions, and we are told that he had many women who supported him in his ministry. In fact, when you take even the disciples of Jesus, none can be compared, even the apostles, to the figure of Mary. And yet, Jesus called only males to be apostles, and the church has always maintained this tradition. And so John Paul II will say that the church does not feel that it has any authority to change this, because that is what has been handed over by Christ himself. Now, let us go to the 3 vows that a priest takes at his ordination: the vow of chastity, the vow of obedience, and the vow of poverty. A priest is called to the vow of celibate chastity because he is called to love. He is called to the general love of God, the universal love of God. He is called, as Matthew chapter 19 reminds us, Jesus says some people have dedicated their lives in order not to marry, so that their whole focus will be on the ministry. This is the reason why priests do not marry. Now, because they do not marry, they are called to love universally and to love everyone the same. And so a priest breaks his vow of celibate chastity not only when he goes outside and he has sex outside his vow, but also when he loves discriminating, or when he's not able to love the sheep that God has given him. When he does that, he has broken the vow of celibate chastity, because it is a vow that is to enable him to love all and to love all equally. In the same way, the vow of poverty is drawn to the simplistic way of Jesus' life. Now, this is what it means, that Jesus Christ became poor that we may be enriched. And so the priest, by his very life, is called to enrich the lives of others by his poverty and by his kenosis. Kenosis is a Greek word which means emptying of himself, which can be found in Philippians chapter 2, when he says that though he was in the form of God, he did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but he emptied himself, giving himself up to us. Now, the last is obedience. A priest is called to be obedient to Christ, to abandon himself and to dedicate himself fully to God. This obedience is what makes him unique and what makes him put himself at the service of Christ. And so when a priest is obedient to Christ, he's not only obedient to Christ, but also to his spouse, which is the church. And so these vows are taken so that a priest, having been called to this service, can dedicate his life fully to Christ. I encourage all men and women who are watching me, those who feel called to service into the religious life, to do so and respond to this beautiful call. And those who feel called to the priesthood, to respond to God and to say, "Here I am, Lord, I come to do your will." Have a blessed lunch. God bless you.
Radio Angelus, 24-hour online radio.